Hello there, it's Silver. This is 2 Point Museum. So yeah, this is the newest entry in the 2 Point series of business management sims, and honestly, I think they just kind of keep getting better with each release. And I also think it's pretty great that this is a museum sim, because that's actually relatively rare. We don't see a lot of those. They do occasionally pop up, but usually we're looking at stuff like theme parks, water parks, hospitals, that sort of thing. A lot less often do you see museum sims. So the first thing to talk about, as usual, is how it looks, and it looks very good. They have created a sort of style when it comes to the 2 Point games. They all have this highly stylized, kind of cartoonish, almost like child-friendly-ish looking style. It looks really good. It's always been very colorful and oddly high detail when it comes to things like exhibits in this case, or in the case of stuff like 2 Point Hospital, in terms of like the way the room clutter and stuff looks. It's all very detailed. So as you would expect if you've been a fan of the 2 Point games at all in the past, this still looks very good, and it looks in line with the rest of them, which is definitely a positive thing because of the really great presentation style that is happening here. But I think in terms of presentation, the real star of the show here is sound, because for one, it has a really good soundtrack. You might not expect simulator games to have really good, memorable soundtracks, but I think if you played something like, say, Roller Coaster Tycoon back in the day, you'll know that there are some songs that do indeed stick in your head. And the music in this game is flavored as if you're constantly listening to a radio station that's playing the music as well as various announcements and things in between songs. And I would call the music in this game overall chill, but also a little bit inspirational, maybe is the theme they're going for. It sounds really good. There's actually some really memorable tracks here, and it's just really nice to listen to in the background as you're doing your thing. You kind of want, at least in my opinion, you want the music of a sim like this to be very chill and very easily listenable, because you're supposed to just have it in the background of whatever it is you're doing. It's not supposed to take very much attention away from what you're doing, but it is supposed to have that nice kind of background effect of just this chill soundtrack as this constant companion behind all of the actual stuff that you're doing. But I think another star of the show here is all of the voice acting and announcements and stuff that happens on the radio, because they're really funny. For one, you have this lady that's always announcing stuff in your museum. She's like sort of a museum worker, and she has all sorts of things to say, actually an impressively large number of different things to say, and everything from like, talking about how when you send people off on expeditions that they may never come back, so you should say goodbye to them, to stuff like just generally harassing the various patrons and stuff. So she's got a lot of stuff to say, and it's all pretty funny and has a lot of personality to it. But the radio itself is also really nice. It's got a ton of personality to it. You hear lots of like kind of talk radio show snippets and stuff in between songs that are usually really funny. They kind of remind me of like a more family-friendly version of what GTA talk radio has. So as a result, you've got this really nice soundscape when it comes to just playing the game in general, because you have the really relaxed music in the background, and you've got these really funny little bits of dialogue and voice acting and stuff in between these songs, and then you've got your announcer lady who is always incredibly snarky at all times. So it creates this really great soundscape where there's always something funny happening at some point. But in terms of how the game plays, there's actually quite a lot to it. So there is a campaign and a sandbox mode, but I'm mostly covering the campaign because that's sort of, the big structured experience that made sense to cover first. And in the case of the campaign, you will start with one museum that is a prehistory specific museum, which is probably what a lot of us think of when we think of the word museum. We think of like dinosaur bones and fossils and things, although there are other types of museum that you will eventually get access to in this game, like marine life or supernatural spooky stuff. The spooky stuff is my favorite, by the way. But you'll begin with just a couple of exhibits in a very basic kind of open plan museum, open floor plan. And the whole thing about how it all works is you need to attract people with buzz. And buzz is just sort of gained by having more exhibits, and more better decorated exhibits as well once you actually have them. And the first things you're going to want to do are mess with all the hiring stuff, because you'll need a ticket booth, of course, so that people can actually purchase tickets and you can open your museum, and you'll need an assistant to work in the ticket booth. You'll also need an expert, a prehistory expert, that can go around and do things like polish up all the various exhibits and make sure they're in top shape. You'll also have a couple of other basic things that you can add to the museum just to help yourself get started, like some basic decorations, because the more well-decorated each exhibit is, the more buzz that it generates. You'll also need some information boards, because the patrons want info. They want knowledge on what all of these exhibits actually are. So you've got to place various info boards around the place that are close enough to each of the exhibits to make sure that they display the info for each one. And then once you have all that, you of course need donation baskets, because people people will want to donate depending on the amount of buzz and stuff that they get and the amount of knowledge and everything from each of the exhibits. So to facilitate all this, you got to have a way for all of your patrons to donate money, and that's what all of the little donation buckets are for. And of course, after this, you'll also need a security guard because, for one, you want to make sure people aren't vandalizing or stealing things, but at the same time, the security guard is the one that goes around emptying all of the donation buckets, and they will eventually fill up over time, so you want them to be emptied regularly. And then finally, you'll want some janitors because people will make litter, they'll deface stuff, they'll do all sorts of things like that, and you'll need janitors around the place to keep everything nice and clean. And then soon after that, you'll be introduced to the room system. There are all sorts of different kinds of rooms that you can build in the museum itself. And you can just build the walls to whatever dimensions you want. Each room has a specific requirement. It'll be like, this has to be 2x3, or this has to be at least 3x4, or something like that. So as long as you meet that, you can make it however big you want. And then once you build the walls, you'll be able to place several different things that room uses inside of it to decorate it and to make it more useful to whatever it is that it's there to do. Like, for instance, the first one you'll build is the staff room because your staff need a place to chill out in between dealing with people and going on expeditions and stuff. So you'll build a staff room and you can put things like a couch in there for them to loaf around on, and this machine that's like a first aid machine that allows them to go into and heal themselves when they get injured on something. But there are many other kinds of rooms to look at that all have their own specialized usages, and some of these will be required as you go through the game later on to get to the more advanced content like workshops or analysis rooms. But not all rooms are for your staff. There are also stuff like bathrooms, which have an obvious use, and there's stuff like gift shops that you can place and put an assistant into staff and things. But of course, it won't be too long before you really need to start going out and getting more exhibits, since you'll only start with a couple. And the way that you do that is through expeditions. So you have a really cool looking little helicopter thing on a helipad outside of the museum, and you can use this to go to an expedition map that shows you various different areas that you can go to, and each of these areas will have several different possible exhibits that you can find if you complete an expedition to that area. So you'll find an area, and then each one will have a different requirement of different staff that you've got to send on it. So your first early expeditions will be very basic and will just need one expert. So all you got to do is pull one of your experts away from the museum for a few days and send them on an expedition. And then once the expedition is over, they'll come back with a crate. You open this crate, it's sort of like a mystery box, and you will see what you got from that expedition, a new exhibit or an addition to an exhibit you already have, because there are several of them that are multiple parts, and you've got to go to that area on the expeditions multiple times to find all of its parts. A lot of these are things like dinosaur skeletons and stuff that come in multiple pieces. But eventually, as you continue to go throughout the various areas, you'll find that they have much more advanced requirements, and you might need a prehistory expert, a janitor, and an assistant to go all on one expedition, which means you've got to pull all of those people away from whatever it is they're doing inside of your museum to go on this expedition, which means they won't be available to do whatever it is they do in the museum until the expedition is over. So this is why you've got to be careful about balancing your staff, because you want enough staff present to where you don't have a whole bunch of jobs that are going undone for a long time because people are on expeditions. But at the same time, you don't want a whole bunch of extraneous staff because you will have to pay all of them separately. And if you have too much staff, then you're going to be spending a crap ton of money on salaries, then you're not even using them. So it's all about balancing all of your staff. And staff also have these skill slots. You can build a specific type of room that allows you to train staff in specific skills over the course of several days, usually about a month or so, actually. Days go really fast in this game. But yeah, you can use this room to train them in new skills, and there are also some individuals that actually come with skills when you hire them, although they'll still only be like level 1 or 2, so the further skill slots will not be unlocked yet until you send them on expeditions and use them to level them up. There are also some skills that are required to go on certain expeditions, like you may see one that needs a survival expert, for instance. So you've got to train at least one person in survival expertise in order to go to that place at all. And then once you're actually on the menu to go to an expedition, you'll see a list of different things, positive and negative, that can happen on that specific expedition. And some of these you can sort of mess with yourself depending on who you're sending. Like, for instance, there may be multiple injury possibilities, things that allow a person to get injured on this expedition. So you can have people like survival experts, and you can also have them take things like first aid kits along with them in order to reduce these chances of this happening. And you can also have all sorts of other things happen that and they might get lost, for instance, which will drastically increase the amount of time it takes for them to come back home, thus depriving your museum of their uses even further. But there's also, at the absolute top end of the risks, there's the ability to permanently lose some people that you send on expedition. So you've got to be really careful about that one, because if you lose someone, they are gone, like forever. So all of the salaries and the skill trainings and levels and stuff that you put into that person are just gone. Also, something to be aware of is when you have people that have skills, because you've trained them up and stuff, they will want a higher salary the more skills they have. So you also want to be careful about training people too quickly and filling out their skill slots too quickly, because it will make them want more money, and you got to make sure you can actually afford to do that first. And then once they come back, you can plop down your new exhibit wherever you want in the museum, wherever you've got space for it. And you'll notice that museum exhibits have quite a lot of different variables in terms of how effective they are at being exhibits, because each one has a certain amount of decoration value, and you want to decorate them in the right way to make that value go up. They will also have a buzz category that is just based on how they're placed in the museum and how well they're decorated, but also every single exhibit has a specific buzz objective that if you meet it, it will drastically increase the amount of buzz it offers. So you may have an exhibit that absolutely has to be next to another prehistory exhibit, for instance, or one that has to have this specific type of decoration around it and things like that. And once you meet all of that, you'll see that you start to generate a ton of buzz, which means you start to get more and more people actually coming to the museum and better donations, and the whole thing just scales up from there. And of course, that means you will need more exhibits to keep people satisfied. Even though your initial basic museum starts off with a very open floor plan, you do have pretty powerful tools in terms of constructing interior walls and gates and things like that to get people going in the right directions. You can even have fences and stuff like a lot of museums have that, those little ribbons that prevent people from going to areas that they're not supposed to go. You can have loads of those to direct people in the directions you want them to go. You can also even build staff doors, so you can have shortcuts for your staff that people can't take. And eventually you'll have to start dealing with the fact that there are other kinds of museum goers than just your average people. You also might get goths who can actually turn into vampires. You can get yetis who will go around with their yeti families. And speaking of families, you can get lots of other families that have kids with them, and kids work a little bit differently than adults when it comes to going to a museum. Kids don't pay any attention at all to the information boards. They don't get anything from info. However, instead, you can use a workshop and a janitor with the workshop skill to build sort of amusement bits that you can place around the museum in different places, in strategic places usually. And these are used by kids and adults to get both info and fun and buzz all in one place. So you want a good variety of these sort of fun interactive exhibits throughout your museum to make sure that you're entertaining as many different kinds of people as possible. And then eventually, once you get your museum going well enough and becoming really self-sufficient and really profitable and stuff, you will reach a 1-star rating for your museum. And once you do this, you gain access to the ability to zoom out of the museum map and go to other museums and start the whole process over there, but they're each for different kinds of exhibits. So you'll start out with the ability to find a marine life museum as well as a supernatural haunted hotel museum. And then once you do this, you'll eventually be able to earn a 1-star rating with that museum too, once you get it going really well. And then you can go back to the original prehistory museum and get up to a 2-star rating there, but that is much more complicated and requires a lot more rooms and stuff. And at this point, you can do things like purchasing entirely new plots to expand the museum to extra buildings. And you'll also start doing things like sacrificing exhibits to be used in this analysis machine that will increase your knowledge level of that particular type of exhibit. So like a prehistory knowledge level or a spooky knowledge level. And these will unlock all sorts of different things like extra bits of decoration that will help you get the museum decorated in like the optimal way to get as much buzz as possible. But like I said, doing this to advance your knowledge levels does consume that exhibit. It gets rid of it. So this is the reason you can go back to previous areas that you've been to already on expeditions and do them again, because this allows you to get duplicates of the various exhibits that you have, and you can use those to further your knowledge of that particular type of exhibit, or indeed you can use it to replace an exhibit that you sacrificed earlier to do the same thing. And as you go and as you start sacrificing these exhibits to get more knowledge, you'll even unlock things like new workshop stuff that you can build for kids and stuff. And you'll just keep going, and it'll just keep getting more complex from there. I think overall this game has a lot of complexity, but it does a really good job of introducing you to the complexity very slowly so you don't feel easily overwhelmed. There's actually a lot going on under the hood here, but it introduces you to these different concepts in such a way that makes them feel very manageable. It kind of compartmentalizes different mechanics in the game and introduces you to them in groups so that you can sort of figure them all out thematically and then move on to the next group. And once you've done this several times, you'll have a whole different batch of mechanics that you now understand and can use to integrate into your museum to make it better. Overall, in my opinion, 2 Point Museum is a very, very solid museum sim that has a wonderful presentation and a really nicely varied and complex set of mechanics that will keep you interested for a long time and has a lot to do in terms of running multiple museums, each with their own themes and their own knowledge levels and stuff. There's a ton of content here to explore, and for the price of $30, I would say it's very, very easily worth that to jump into and have a great time. If you're a fan of simulation games at all, you really owe it to yourself to play the 2 Point games, and this one in particular I think is the best one they've made. It's also just a really good one of those unwindy games where you got this chill music in the background and you're just sort of coasting along doing your own thing, completing a couple of simple objectives or something more advanced if you want to actually get over to it. And it means that this is a really good game to sort of have installed for a long time and just pull up whenever you want to unwind. So my personal verdict is that it is very well worth its asking price. It's actually pretty inexpensive for the amount of content that's on offer here, and I have no problems recommending it whatsoever. So if you're a fan of games like this, or if you just kind of enjoy like tycoon and business games and stuff, this is a really good one, and it's just a really chill, fun time. So thank you guys very much for watching. I will put the link in the description below this video to the Steam store page for 2 Point Museum if you guys wish to check it out yourselves, and I'll see you next time.